They say betrayal comes from the ones closest to you, but what happens when the betrayal isn't as simple as a kiss, or a lie, or a hidden text message? What happens when the betrayal isn't just about what someone else did to you, but what you felt, what you allowed, what you never saw coming until it was too late? If someone had told me 5 years ago that I'd end up in this situation, I would have laughed, shaken my head, called them crazy. Because I was a wife, a mother, a woman who knew her place, knew her morals, knew the lines you never cross. But life has a funny way of testing you. And sometimes, the test isn't loud. It isn't obvious. It doesn't come crashing into your world like some kind of explosion. No, sometimes it starts slow, quiet, like a whisper you don't even notice at first. A subtle shift in the air. A feeling you can't quite name. And before you know it, you're standing at the edge of a cliff, staring down at a truth you never meant to find. I can still feel the weight of that moment, the way the air in the room seemed to thicken, the way my own body betrayed me with emotions I couldn't explain, the way my heart pounded in my chest, not with fear, not with excitement, but with something much darker, something much more dangerous. It all started with something so simple, so innocent. A massage. My back had been aching, stress, exhaustion, years of carrying the weight of a marriage that had long since lost its warmth. And then, my son offered to help. My son. Before you jump to conclusions, before your mind races ahead, let me tell you this. Nothing is ever as black and white as it seems. And if you think you know where this story is going, trust me, you don't. This is a story about loneliness, about emotional starvation, about the fine, thin line between comfort and something else. Something that shouldn't have been there. Something I never expected. If you've ever felt unseen, unheard, if you've ever reached for something, someone, just to feel alive again, then maybe, just maybe, you'll understand. I can't change what happened. I can't take back the choices, the moments, the thoughts that ran through my mind that night. But I can tell you my story. And maybe, just maybe, you'll see a part of yourself in it, too. So, are you ready? Because once you hear this, there's no going back. If you're new here, welcome. This is Shocking Infidelity Saga, where real stories come to life, where secrets unravel, and where nothing is ever as it seems. Hit that subscribe button, because trust me, this is one story you won't want to miss. If I had to describe my life in one word, it would be silent. It wasn't always like this. There was a time when our house was filled with laughter, when love was something I could feel, not just something I remembered. My husband, David, he used to look at me like I was the only woman in the world. Back when we were young, back when passion wasn't just a word, but something we lived. But life has a way of wearing things down. Love doesn't just die all at once. It fades, a little bit at a time. In the beginning, you don't notice it. Maybe he forgets to kiss you goodbye one morning. Maybe he starts coming home later and later, too tired to talk, too exhausted to care. At first, you tell yourself it's just a phase. Work is hard, responsibilities build up. You make excuses, because that's what a good wife does, right? You wait. You hope. But then one day, you wake up and realize it's been years since you've felt his touch linger on your skin. Since you've heard him say your name with warmth, with longing. And the worst part? You're not even angry anymore. Just empty. David was always busy. He threw himself into his work, and somewhere along the way, he forgot about me. Or maybe he just stopped seeing me. I could be in the same room, sitting right next to him, and still feel invisible. I tried. God knows, I tried. I see the way my heart leaned toward the only person who made me feel like I mattered. And that's the part that haunts me the most. Because I never meant for any of this to happen. It all started with a massage. Just one. Just innocent. Or at least, that's what I told myself. It was just another evening. Just like every other. Or at least, that's what I thought. Dinner was over. The house was quiet, except for the faint hum of the television playing a show I wasn't really watching. I sat on the couch, rubbing the back of my neck, rolling my shoulders, trying to ease the dull, constant ache that had settled there, stress, exhaustion, Years of carrying a weight no one else could see. Michael noticed. He always noticed. "Mom, are you okay?" I forced a small smile, waving him off. "I'm fine. Just tired." But he wasn't convinced. He never was. He moved closer, standing over me, his brows knit together in concern. "Your back's been hurting a lot lately, hasn't it?" I exhaled, letting my head drop back against the couch. "It's nothing. I'll be okay." A beat of silence. Then his voice, softer this time. "I could help. Just a little massage, nothing crazy. It might make you feel better." For a second, I thought about saying no. It wasn't necessary. It wasn't his responsibility to take care of me. But then again, who else would? David barely even looked at me anymore. And my body ached, not just from stress, but from something deeper. From years of longing for touch, for warmth, for something more than just existing beside another person. So I nodded. Just a small, simple nod. And that was all it took. He moved behind me on the couch, his hands resting gently on my shoulders at first, barely any pressure. And when he started, it was nice. It was nothing. Just a son trying to help his mother. That's all it was. But then, something changed. I don't know when it happened. Maybe it was when his fingers pressed a little deeper, finding the tension knotted in my muscles. Maybe it was when I let out a soft sigh, feeling the stress unravel under his touch. Or maybe it was the way his hands lingered just a second too long, just long enough for something to register in the space between us. The air in the room felt different. He must have felt it too, because his hands hesitated for the briefest moment before continuing, like a pause in a song, just long enough to notice, but not long enough to call it a mistake. I should have pulled away. I could have. But I didn't. Instead, I let my eyes drift shut, let my body relax under his hands. And that's when I felt it, the shift, the unspoken tension creeping in like a whisper, like a shadow stretching across the floor. It wasn't about the touch itself. It was about what it meant. Or rather, what I was letting it mean. I told myself it was nothing. That I was imagining things. That the warmth spreading through me was just relief, just gratitude. But somewhere deep inside me, in the part of myself I wasn't ready to face yet, I knew the truth. That night, something changed. Though I didn't realize it at the time. Looking back, I wonder if that was the moment I should have stopped everything. If I had known where it would lead, would I have? Or was I already too far gone? I told myself it was nothing. That's what I whispered as I lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, my mind replaying the moment over and over like a film stuck on repeat. It was just a massage. Just a moment of comfort. That's all. That's all. So why did it feel different? I shifted under the covers, feeling the empty space beside me where my husband should have been. David had fallen asleep hours ago, back turned, body still, breathing deep. The same way he had for years, like I was just another piece of furniture in the house, something to exist beside, but never with. I closed my eyes, willing myself to sleep. But the feeling wouldn't go away. That tiny, nagging voice in the back of my mind whispering that something had shifted, something had cracked open inside me. The next morning, I tried to act normal. Pretend nothing had changed. But it was there. In the way my body tensed when Michael walked into the kitchen. In the way my breath caught for just a second when he said good morning. In the way his eyes lingered on me, just a little too long. Or maybe that was my imagination. Maybe I was reading into things that weren't there. Maybe I was making something out of nothing. Or maybe something had really changed. I started noticing things I hadn't noticed before. The way Michael's voice softened when he spoke to me, the way he seemed more attuned to my moods than ever before. The way his touch lingered, just a second longer than necessary when he passed me a plate, when his fingers brushed mine. Things that once meant nothing, suddenly meant everything. I told myself I was being ridiculous. That I was overthinking. But then came the small moments, the little details that made my chest tighten, made my breath hitch in a way I couldn't explain. Like the way he started watching me more. Not in an obvious way, but in the way a person notices something they weren't meant to see. In the way his eyes flicked to me during dinner, watching as I absently ran a hand over my shoulder, as if remembering the feeling of his touch. Or the way he seemed to gravitate toward me more, always there, always close. A brush of his arm when he walked past. A presence that felt too intentional, too heavy, yet too unspoken to be acknowledged. And then there were the nights. The nights when I lay awake, wondering why my mind refused to let go of something that should have meant nothing. Why my body tensed with awareness whenever he was near. Why I found myself looking for him in a way I never had before. I started to feel ashamed. Guilty. This was my son. My child. I was his mother. This was ridiculous. It was wrong. It was nothing. And yet, if it was nothing, why did it feel so real? I thought about David. About how cold he had become. About how his touch had become something mechanical, something meaningless. When was the last time he had looked at me the way Michael did? When was the last time he had seen me? When was the last time I had felt alive? It was laughable, really. The way I had spent years convincing myself I didn't need affection, that I was fine without it. That I could exist in a marriage where I was invisible and still be okay. And then, one moment, one harmless moment, shattered everything I thought I knew about myself. Because now I wasn't okay. Now I couldn't stop thinking, couldn't stop feeling, couldn't stop questioning whether this was all in my head, or if there was something lurking beneath the surface, something neither of us were saying out loud. I wish I could tell you I let it go. That I shook it off, buried the thoughts, moved on like nothing ever happened. But the truth is, I didn't. Because deep down, in the part of myself I didn't want to face, I knew something had already begun. And once a door like that cracks open, there's no closing it. I don't know why I let it happen again. Maybe I was fooling myself. Maybe I was pretending that the first time had been nothing more than what I told myself it was, harmless. A moment of comfort. A fleeting thing that would pass like a shadow in the night, something I would wake up from and never think about again. But I did think about it. And that was the problem. It stayed with me. The memory of his touch, the warmth of his hands on my back, the way I felt, alive, for the first time in years. And once you feel something like that, once you taste it, it's impossible to pretend it never happened. So when my shoulders started aching again, when I found myself sitting on the couch in the same position, rubbing at the same knots of tension, I didn't stop him when he offered again. I should have. But I didn't. This time, it felt different. I don't know if it was him or if it was me. Maybe both of us. Maybe neither of us. But something had shifted. His hands moved slower. More careful. More deliberate. And I let them. I let myself sink into the feeling, let my body react in ways I didn't want to acknowledge. The room felt smaller. The air felt heavier. Every touch sent ripples through me, not just through my skin, but deeper. Into something I had buried for a long time. And then I heard myself speaking. Words slipping out of me before I could stop them. Thoughts I had never dared to say out loud. I don't even know the last time your father touched me like this. I felt him freeze behind me. Just for a second. Just long enough to know he heard it. Long enough to know that I had crossed into something dangerous. But then he exhaled, his hands resuming their slow, careful movements, and he said something I wasn't ready for. He doesn't see you, Mom. And there it was. The thing I had been trying so hard not to acknowledge. The truth, spoken out loud between us, sitting heavy in the space that used to be safe. I swallowed hard, staring straight ahead, heart pounding. No, I whispered, barely audible. He doesn't. I should have stopped it then. I should have stood up, walked away, laughed it off, anything to put this back where it belonged. But I didn't move. Neither of us did. His hands were still on me. His voice was still soft. And for the first time in a long time, I felt understood. And that was the moment I realized this wasn't just comfort anymore. This wasn't just a son taking care of his mother. This was something else. Something that should have never begun. But it had. And once he let something like that in, there's no going back. I should have known the moment was coming. You don't drift into something like this without eventually hitting a wall, a moment when everything that's been left unsaid is forced into the open, whether you're ready for it or not. And that moment came on a night like any other. Or at least, it should have been. The house was still. David was asleep upstairs, the usual hum of his soft snoring filling the air, like a reminder of just how absent he truly was, even when he was right there. Michael was sitting across from me at the kitchen table. Just the two of us, a dim light casting shadows against the walls, the space between us feeling smaller than usual. He had been quiet all evening, quieter than normal. I should have asked what was on his mind. I should have been the mother in that moment, the guiding force, the one in control. But I wasn't. Instead, I just sat there, sipping my tea, feeling the weight of something in the air. Something thick. Something unspoken. Then, finally, he spoke. "Mom, I don't like the way things feel at home." I felt my stomach tighten. My heart pounded, hard and fast, but I forced myself to keep my face neutral. "What do you mean?" My voice was softer than I intended. Like I already knew what he meant. Like I was afraid of his answer. Michael hesitated. His fingers tapped the edge of the table, his jaw clenched, like he was deciding whether or not to say the thing that would change everything. He exhaled sharply, shaking his head. "I don't like how things are with you and Dad." I swallowed hard. "Things are fine." A lie. A weak, empty lie that neither of us believed. Michael's eyes met mine. And in them, I saw something I hadn't been ready to acknowledge. He saw me. Not just as his mother. Not just as the woman who cooked his meals and washed his clothes and made sure he had everything he needed. He saw me as a woman. A woman who was aching. A woman who was lonely. A woman who had spent too long pretending she didn't need more than what life had given her. "Mom, I just want you to be happy." I felt it then. The moment where the line thinned to almost nothing. The moment where a single word, a single movement, could tip everything over the edge. My hands trembled around my mug, the warmth of the tea long since faded. My chest tightened, a war raging inside me. This was it. The point where I had to make a choice. I could brush past the moment. Laugh it off. Reassure him, tell him everything was fine. Tell him not to worry about things he didn't understand. Keep everything locked away where it belonged. Or, I could acknowledge the truth. I could meet his eyes and let him see what I had been trying so desperately to hide. Let him know that I felt it too, the shift, the weight, the way we had begun to orbit each other like two stars caught in a force neither of us could name. My throat felt dry. My pulse hammered in my ears. I had to say something. David's name lit up the screen. He was calling from upstairs, probably half asleep, wondering why I wasn't in bed. The tension shattered. The moment, whatever it had been, was gone. I let out a shaky exhale and reached for the phone, my hands still trembling as I answered. "Hello?" Michael stood, his chair scraping against the floor, his expression unreadable. He didn't say another word. He just walked away. And that was when I knew. This wasn't over. Not even close. The next morning felt different. I woke up with a heaviness in my chest, as if the air in the house had thickened overnight. The sun poured in through the curtains, golden and soft, but it did nothing to warm the chill inside me. David was already gone. I barely remembered him coming to bed. At some point in the night, he had slipped in beside me, the mattress dipping under his weight, but not once had he reached for me. Not once had he stirred me from sleep. He might as well have been a stranger sleeping beside me, a ghost in our bed. I sat up slowly, rubbing my hands over my face, trying to shake off the lingering thoughts from the night before. Trying to tell myself that nothing had really happened. That I was imagining things. That I had just been tired. That Michael's words, "I just want you to be happy," hadn't meant what I thought they did. But no matter how much I tried to convince myself, the feeling remained. I wasn't imagining it. Something had changed. And the weight of it pressed against my ribs like a secret too big to hold. A pause. The voice is quieter now, cautious, like stepping into dangerous territory. I forced myself through the motions of the morning. Coffee. Toast. The sound of the television playing in the background, some news segment I wasn't paying attention to. But then, I felt him before I even saw him. Michael. He entered the kitchen slowly, hesitating at the doorway, his body stiff in a way that made my stomach tighten. I didn't turn to look at him right away. I couldn't. But I could feel his presence, heavy, lingering, the same way it had the night before. I swallowed hard, gripping my coffee cup like it could somehow ground me. "Morning," I said, my voice carefully even. "Morning," he replied, but his tone wasn't casual. It wasn't the same easy, boyish voice I was used to hearing. It was measured, controlled, careful. I finally forced myself to meet his eyes, and that's when I saw it. The shift. It was in the way he looked at me, not like his mother, but like something else. Like something fragile. Like something he wanted to protect. There was no fear in his gaze, no discomfort. Only awareness. A quiet understanding of something we weren't saying out loud. I turned back to my coffee, pretending not to notice the way he lingered in the doorway. But the silence between us spoke louder than any words could. We both knew. Something had been set into motion, and there was no taking it back. The day passed in a blur of avoidance. I kept myself busy cleaning, folding laundry, organizing drawers that didn't need organizing. Anything to keep my mind occupied, to push down the creeping unease in my stomach. Michael, on the other hand, didn't avoid me. If anything, he was closer than before. More present. Watching me in quiet, subtle ways. His glances were different now, less casual, more deliberate. And it wasn't just that he was looking at me. It was how he was looking at me. As if he was waiting. As if he was trying to understand what I was thinking. And the worst part? I didn't want him to stop. That was the part that gnawed at me the most. The guilt was there, sitting heavy in my chest, but beneath it was something else. Something I didn't want to name. Something I had spent years pretending I didn't need. Affection. Attention. Being seen. And Michael, he saw me. It was a dangerous realization. One that should have terrified me. But instead, all I felt was warmth. And that terrified me even more. David didn't notice. Of course he didn't. He came home late that evening, distracted, talking about some client, some project, something that had nothing to do with us. He kissed my cheek out of habit, barely even looking at me before heading upstairs to his office. That was our routine. That was our marriage. I watched him walk away, feeling nothing. Not anger. Not sadness. Not even disappointment. Just emptiness. And then I glanced over at Michael. He was watching me from across the room, his expression unreadable, his posture tense. And in that moment, something passed between us. A silent understanding, a shared secret that neither of us had spoken out loud. The weight of what almost happened lingered in the air between us, thick and suffocating. I should have said something. I should have drawn a line. I should have made it clear that whatever was happening needed to stop before it became something neither of us could undo. But I didn't. Instead, I did what I had been doing for years. I let the moment pass. I turned away, walked into the kitchen, and pretended that nothing had changed. But it had. And I knew, deep down, that this was only the beginning. I was losing myself. I could feel it happening. I could feel the parts of me unraveling, slipping through my fingers like sand, and yet, I wasn't doing anything to stop it. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, I found myself standing in front of the bathroom mirror, staring at my own reflection like I didn't recognize the woman looking back at me. My face looked the same tired eyes, same faint creases on my forehead, the same lips that hadn't been kissed with real passion in years. But there was something different in my expression. Something I couldn't ignore. I looked guilty. I looked like a woman who had crossed an invisible line, a woman who had entertained a thought she never should have entertained. I gripped the edges of the sink, knuckles white, my breath shallow. My own thoughts were choking me. What does this say about me? That question haunted me. The shame of it pressed into my chest, heavy and unrelenting. I was a mother, a wife, a woman who had built her life on responsibility, on doing what was right, on making sure everyone else had what they needed. So why had I let myself fall into this? I squeezed my eyes shut, trying to push the thoughts away, but they didn't stop. They only came faster, crashing over me like waves I couldn't escape. Was I looking for love in the wrong place? That was the truth, wasn't it? It wasn't just about Michael. It was about something much deeper. Something that had been missing in my life for years. I was starving for affection. For warmth. For something real. And when I didn't get it from the man who had vowed to love me, I found it in the only person who noticed me. And now I had turned him into something he should have never been. I had taken an innocent connection and let it shift into something unspoken, something dangerous. And worst of all, I liked it. I felt sick. I wanted to erase the last few days, go back to before this all started, before I let myself feel what I felt. But there was no erasing it now. It was there, and I had to face it. This couldn't go on. If I let it continue, I knew where it would lead. I could already see the destruction waiting at the end of this path, Michael, confused and hurt, caught between love and something he wasn't supposed to feel. David, oblivious now, but what if he saw it? What if one day, he finally looked at me and realized what I had done, what I had allowed to fester in the quiet spaces between us? The family we had built, shattered. The home we lived in, poisoned with guilt and regret. And me, standing in the ruins, knowing that I had no one to blame but myself. I had to put a stop to it. Not tomorrow. Not later. Now. I had to step back. I had to stop looking at Michael as anything more than my son. I had to stop leaning on him to fill the spaces that my husband had left empty. Because that wasn't his job. It was never supposed to be his job. I needed to confront the real problem, my marriage. My loneliness. My inability to ask for what I needed instead of waiting for someone to give it to me. I was a woman lost in my own emptiness, and I had nearly dragged someone else down with me. I had to find another way to heal. A way that didn't leave scars on the people I loved. I made a promise to myself that night. A silent, desperate vow. I would create distance. I would pull away. I would remind myself of the lines that should have never been blurred. I would find a way to fix what was broken inside me without using someone else to do it. Because if I didn't, I knew I wouldn't be able to stop what was coming next. Have you ever felt invisible? Like you were standing right in front of someone who once looked at you with love, with desire, with something, but now you're just there? Have you ever gone to bed beside someone who felt more like a stranger than a partner? I know I can't be the only one. Loneliness doesn't always come from being alone. Sometimes, the worst kind of loneliness is the kind you feel when you're surrounded by people. When you have a home, a family, a life that looks perfect from the outside, but inside, you're starving for something real. So tell me, what would you do? If you were in my position, if you had spent years being unseen, untouched, unheard, would you have done something different? Or would you have made the same mistake I did? I want to hear from you. Tell me in the comments, have you ever felt emotionally abandoned? Have you ever found yourself reaching for something, someone, just to remind yourself that you're still alive? Your stories matter. Your voices matter. Let's talk. And if you want more stories like this, real, raw, unfiltered, then don't forget to like this video, share it, and subscribe to Shocking Infidelity Saga. Because trust me, there are so many more stories left to tell. I wish I could say I came out of this unscathed. I wish I could say that realizing my mistake was enough to erase it, to undo the damage, to rewrite the story before it was too late. But life doesn't work that way. Some mistakes you can take back. Others you have to live with. Loneliness is dangerous. It creeps up on you, sinks into your skin, makes you crave things you shouldn't. It blurs lines. It makes you question your own reflection. And the worst part? It makes you vulnerable to things you never thought you'd be capable of. Love, attention, being seen, these things are essential. But they have to come from the right place. From the right person. Because when they don't, they leave scars. Deep ones. The kind that don't fade, no matter how much time passes. I don't know if I'll ever forgive myself for the way I let things spiral. I don't know if Michael will ever look at me the same way again. I don't know if David will ever wake up and realize that he lost me long before I even realized I was gone. But I do know one thing. Some doors, once opened, can never be closed again. I just hope that if you ever find yourself at that door, staring at it, hesitating with your hand on the handle, you have the strength to walk away.